DJ Archwisp, ladies and gentlemen. He's generous enough to lend me some of his music so we could play it on the intros to my shows, and I would not want anybody else. Check him out at soundcloud.com/DJ Archwisp. It's literally on the loading screen, and I'm like, what's the URL? What up, dude?
Not much. What's kicking?
What is going on, my brother? Welcome back to my little humble show, Quaddy. Man, we got a lot to talk about, I think. How quickly 2 months goes by. That seems like, on one hand, it seems like a year. On the other hand, it seems like, holy shit, it's been 2 months of this. 3 months. I mean, depending where you are. In California, what? You are, how long have you been in the shit?
Oh yeah, man, it's approaching 3 months now. Or 2-3 months. Been pretty rough and weird. I just keep telling everybody every day, waking up, like, this is the weirdest nightmare. I'm just gonna wake up and, man, that dream was forever, and that was the weirdest nightmare I've ever had. But
Right.
you know, not the case. Keep waking up.
And like, how did I gain 30 pounds overnight? Like,
Yeah, well, I'm blaming COVID for everything now.
bro.
Like, that's what it is. Like, gosh, my car, my car broke down. Shit, it's COVID. Like, oh, I gained a bunch of weight. It's COVID. It's all right. Just embrace it.
It's oh my god. Yeah, it was I was on a good clip too, man. As a physician yourself, I was I was trying to be healthy, and I was trying to not be fat anymore, and then like this just came along, and I was like, well, time to do all the comfort foods.
Well, it's kind of hard. We have all these limitations, social distancing, stay-at-home orders. It's been pretty rough to even kind of adjust to a new normal, let alone try to accomplish a lot of the goals that just isn't really possible now. And like all of our patterns, all of our rituals have kind of just been thrown out the window. Some people have adopted new ones that are good, some people haven't. But I think all in all, it just really depends on your coping skills, your strategies, how resilient you are, is how you've been able to adapt to this. And I don't think there's anything wrong with letting a few things go by the wayside as long as you recognize them, try to correct them and fix them. But I think the biggest thing we can talk about with resiliency is, like, if you don't have that store of people that you can rely on, you got to get them. And that's something that's really, I think, present in the hacker communities, that people can come together and help each other out every once in a while. We need to be able to lean on each other during rough times, let alone during a pandemic. Something we'll see for only once in our life, hopefully.
Yeah. Hey, Geek Speed. And by the way, in the interim 2 months, I've gotten all hoity-toity with this stream, and it's now like affiliated, and I get subscription. So like when I do I still get a little bit embarrassed by it. Like, hey, thanks for the sub, follow, like, smash the button, whatever people say. Hey, Geek Speed, thanks, man. He subscribed with Twitch Prime. And also because of, like, I'm one of the old, like, I did radio, and my interview technique is like, just do the fucking interview. Like, just talk and don't derail, or derail as little as possible, and that kind of stuff that I'm still starting to get used to it. So for anybody who hadn't joined us before, for the last one where I had a whole panel, which were you one of my star panelists, introduce yourself, and who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, my name's Quaddy. I'm an emergency medicine doc. I practice out in California. So I'm kind of in the shit of it, if you will. Although we're not so bad here in California compared to places that were much more the hot spots, like New York and Washington in the first beginning parts of the pandemic. But that's my day job. But when I'm not at work, I'm a hacker. Just like, I've been going to DEF CON since 13, spoken a few times. I do security research on medical devices and hospital infrastructure. So I care less about the HIPAA shit, which is important, don't get me wrong, but I care more about what happens when your pacemaker, insulin pump, your infusion pump, stuff that can actually hurt people. It's connected by shitty, no authentication or not secure on important networks, and that stuff gets compromised. What happens to people's health? Like literally life or death type of stuff.
HIPAA's a fad anyway. It's fine. Like,
yeah, dude. It's totally.
Why even get into it, honestly?
It's like the Atkins diet. HIPAA's like the Atkins diet.
So last time we talked, the theme of that show was The title that I had was called "Do No Harm," and my initial idea was this may I was in full paranoia regalia by that point. I had just like I'd been talking to friends of mine who are preppers. I had done a prepper panel. I hadn't even bought my handgun yet, and I was like, what if it's gonna be like fucking fire in the streets and like how do we prepare and how do you do emergency medical stuff and blah 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 blah. So suffice to say, none of that where I am has come to fruition. I haven't had to perform a tracheotomy on a toddler in a mall or something, not like the malls are even open. There were some things that I got, my paranoia got super wrong. There were some things that I had underestimated. I think when we had talked, I don't know if it had hit New York yet. I think it was still people were talking a lot about Seattle and Washington State and West Coast. So I tried to look for a specific date, and I'm sure I could go back in our chat and figure it out. But yeah, I don't know why it took me by surprise to see how uber effed New York got and Jersey's right across the street from me. Like, I saw things on the highway, like jarring things that were like I saw they were using those automated LCD LED screens or whatever to say if you're coming in from New York, quarantine automatically. And I was like, well, that's upsetting. Like that's jarring.
Yeah.
So how was it for you last time we talked? And was it worse in the past 2 months than you thought it was going to be? About the same? Was it better? What was your impression back then, and what's the reality for you now?
So I think I share a lot of a similar experience, but I want to just start off by saying, like, we're not done.
Yeah.
This could go any direction. And so when we talk about kind of what's happened so far, I think it's important to recognize the whole point of shelter at home and washing your hands and wearing masks and things like that was to reduce the spread, right? Flatten the curve. We all talked about that. We talked about that in your last panel. And I think that we have seen some real fruit from that. So luckily, I was on the receiving end of that, right? I wasn't in New York, I'm in California. And where I was particularly, we've seen lots of COVID. I see COVID probably once a shift when I go and work. I'll definitely diagnose like 1 or 2 cases of COVID when I work. But we're not New York. And I remember when we first got word of this and we were hearing about what was going to hit, it was full panic mode. I mean, so much of the healthcare infrastructure in the United States, people were talking online. Doctors were talking online about, how are we going to put multiple people on a single ventilator? I remember watching a podcast that was doctors talking to other doctors about how are we going to take one ventilator and ventilate 2 people? How are we going to deal with this and this and this? And people flowing out, which we can't save. So there was lots of talks about ethics. How do you determine who lives and who dies? And I remember this was pretty distressing and pretty worrisome to a lot of us on the front end. I will say this, emergency medicine, that's what I practice. We're the cool specialty of medicine, right? Like we're not the lame ass surgeons or the tightwad dermatologists, right? And we're not the Ferrari driving cardiologists. Like we're the cool
dermatologists.
I know, Jesus. We're like the cool ones that drive like regular cars and you want to hang out and drink beer with, right? Yeah. And they got cool stories about stuff people put up their butt.
Yeah.
We are generally stereotyped to be this specialty of medicine where we are very excited about like danger and gunshot. We get excited about trauma and things like that. But I still remember, and that's a lot of why I was attracted to the specialty. It was a little scary thinking about, well, if this really happens and it's as bad as people are going to say, and we're going to have 2 million people dying, what's my day at work going to be like? Am I going to live at the hospital, for example? I'd also just had a little baby boy born, my son, Ben. And it was like, how are we going to raise this kid who's weeks old in this pandemic? Like, what if he gets it? We didn't know a lot about how the disease affected kids and stuff. So I was going to work every day, intubating COVID patients, and then I'd come home and can I touch my kid? Can I say hi to my wife? This is that was the beginnings. And we were talking about these nightmare scenarios. And luckily, a lot of those things we talked about, those social distancing measures, face masks, the public policy initiatives that we took, I think really saved a lot of the patients in my area. Like I mentioned, I still see COVID patients a lot, but it's not nearly as bad.
Hmm.
In fact, we've actually seen a dip in the amount of patients I see at work. Well, meaning maybe I would normally see 20, 25 patients, 30 patients a shift. Now I'm seeing 15 maybe. Now, generally speaking, those 15 are sick. A lot of people, and this is something I think you've probably seen in the news as well, people have really bad heart disease, really bad lung disease, diabetes, stuff like that. When they get sick, a lot of them are choosing not to go to the hospital. They're so afraid that if they go to the hospital, they're going to get coronavirus. So you've had plenty of cases all over this country of people who have gotten so sick and too afraid to go in, and then by the time they get to us, it's really a really dire situation. So now we're seeing less patients in my neck of the woods per shift, but they tend to be sicker, and
Hmm.
they're the ones that really have to be there. You'd be surprised sometimes what comes in as an emergency at 2 a.m., like toenails that need to be clipped and stuff like that. And that stuff is not coming in anymore.
Yeah.
The only stuff we're getting the real sick people. So that's where it's like now, last time we had talked about, well, what does this look like from um, how it's going to impact our community? Initially, we had talked about up to 2 million people dying. We've just so sad to hear we passed the 100,000 person death mark here in this country. There's a lot of debate about that number. Is the number too low? Is the number too high? How are we adequately testing and things like that? There's a lot of concerning comparisons with, is this as bad as the flu? And I think all of this just kind of misses the entire point, which was we did what we were supposed to do. It's luckily not as bad as it could have been.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that we were wrong. It didn't mean that we underestimated. It just means that what we did worked.
Right. Yeah, I'm getting, from because I've luckily have friends like all over the country, and this country and the overseas and stuff. So I get a lot of different, how it's running with them. I get from people that in New Jersey and New York, and that are still very on edge, and then I have friends in Texas who are like, I don't know, we've been out drinking at bars for weeks now, and like, which blows my mind. And a lot of different lot of different attitudes about it. As I mean, here in Pennsylvania, and I don't know, is the entire country, or is it like a state by state basis about how they're reopening things? Like, is it that phase color level everywhere? Or because I know in Pennsylvania we're about to go yellow, which means a lot more stuff can start to kind of ease open.
Yeah, great question. So this is always kind of a very interesting thing because we haven't had something like this recently, right? We've had to figure out how to respond in real time to a pandemic in this country, and then also figure out how to tier back our public health interventions. And to tell you the truth, a lot of that is just we take the best available science, we take the best available expertise, and we get them together in a room and we try to figure out the best policy. Now, that policy from the CDC does not fit 100% to every scenario, right? So we shouldn't say the whole country is on red, the whole country is on yellow. A lot of that just doesn't make sense. So their thought was, can we go to states and let them set their own type of criteria, in consultation with the CDC and the best science and things? Can we allow the states to kind of forge their own path in reopening? I think generally speaking, a lot of people think it's a positive thing, but what it's led to is this confusion that you bring up, which is, for example, we're stages 1, 2, 3, perhaps in California, you're by colors, they aren't consistent. So you're looking at a friend in the next state and they're allowed to do stuff that you're not allowed to. And you're saying, well, this is a total arbitrary thing. It's led to a lot of frustration and a lot of confusion, especially since some states are really doing more than others to disseminate that information and to have really comprehensive policies. For example, in certain states, there's clear guidelines about how many people you can get into a room now. If we reach this particular stage or this particular color, we think we can have social gatherings of this amount. That's not universal. And so what it's done is just people don't know where to go, and they aren't necessarily always getting their information from their home state or their own local area. So my guidance to you is that there is no unifying principle, and there's a lot of differences between the states. As a consequence, there's a lot of confusion. My suggestion to you and anyone who's listening is, if you do feel that way, that you're frustrated, you can't get that type of information, I would suggest that you continue to look for that, get local if you can. And then when there are particular interventions that don't make sense or aren't covered, I would go to a source like the CDC. And just know this: we're not going to be able to give prescriptive advice for every scenario, right? I mean, this is a really hard thing. People want to do things. They want to go back to work. Their jobs have been lost. The economy in certain all over this country is just in ruin because of this. They want to get back to work, and they're looking for guidance in some of these very specific very specific scenarios, and we won't be able to give that to you. We just don't have good science, and we could also be wrong. That's true. Like, we've never done this before. When I say we, like I'm speaking for the CDC, that's not the case. The healthcare in general.
I speak for the CDC. Don't worry, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Fauci's calling me, texting me. Long story short, we could get this wrong, and perhaps some states could get it right, and some states could get it wrong. If you're having a really aggressive reopening, like we've heard about some of these states, they could have hotspots flash back up. If social distancing is really going by the wayside, like we see a lot in the news of these gatherings, these pool parties, we will see hotspots emerge. How we respond to those will determine whether or not those are one-off infections, dozens of people, hundreds of people, or potentially thousands.
What is your reaction as a medical professional? Side note: how long did you go? Like, how long did you have to go to school to be an ER doctor? Like, how many years of school did you have to go through?
Yeah, man. You're trying to get me depressed, huh? Let's see here.
I'm not asking you for your school loan balance.
Oh, you really want to get me depressed? So I did an undergrad. I actually studied philosophy. I thought really hard at the end of it about how I would never find a job. So I was able to do that really well. I got a master's degree. So 4 years, and I got a master's degree in 1 year. And then I went to med school for 4. Then I did 3 years of ER training. And then I did 2 years of fellowship.
So that's like 80 years.
That's like
90 years. Sorry, my math is bad. 400 years of medical expertise. With all of that expertise, what is your reaction when you see parties in the Ozarks of those people in the pool? Everybody, like, what is your reaction as a medical professional, and B, as a regular human that's probably like, all right, maybe I'm ready to get this over with too. Gut reaction when you first saw that.
Yeah, it's hard to separate kind of my own personal feelings from my clinical experience. Like, what I see is just needless harm.
Mm-hmm.
When people get upset, they don't want to wear a mask, and they talk about the Constitution, like that. That's all besides the point to me. It's like the only person you're hurting is potentially yourself or some innocent other person, right? Like, it doesn't. There's some discussion about whether or not if you put a mask on, you're going to have hypercapnia and there's damage. That's just all BS. The harm of wearing a mask is non-existent. The harm by not wearing a mask is really consequential, potentially, especially when so many people don't pay attention to it. They get together and they do a party. So part of me as a clinician is just like, wow, this is going to be a bummer because these people are going to get sick. Someone's going to get really sick and potentially die. And then also, from a person kind of perspective, I can understand the fatigue. You've been at home. I got kids. I miss my friends. I miss my hacker family. Like, I go into my local DEF CON groups. These types of things are a big bummer. So I could see perhaps the draw. But what I don't think people realize is that it's because you haven't seen someone get sick with COVID, or because you haven't had a family member die because of it. It's just so far removed from you. And as a consequence, you don't really have that perspective.
Hi, Ben.
Yeah.
I recognize that sound. He's probably got his cute little baby feet curled up and everything. I'm a sucker for baby feet.
So it kind of makes me sad, but I can understand it. What I do think we need to do is a better job of educating people on the purpose and the reason, right? People want to point to say that the guidelines were conflicting, or it's not around in my area. Well, it's not around your area yet, or maybe you don't have adequate testing, or perhaps you don't see the consequences of the elderly person that you infected because you didn't wear a mask at the grocery store. You're so far removed from the potential consequences that your perspective's gone. It's me on the other end of that sees a tube going into someone's trachea that recognizes, like, this could have been prevented.
So directly related to that, and I almost thought that you were like answering the question that came up in the chat from Miss Nicole Beckwith. What are your thoughts on, and we had touched on this a couple months ago, I think, masks weren't as, it was still kind of weird to see them Even weirder to wear them, on myself or whoever else. What are your thoughts on wearing masks? Nicole said I've heard so many contradictory news articles and blah blah blah. Um, I'll give what I think after you give your thoughts on masks.
Yeah, this has just become like a lot of fodder for why we shouldn't trust. Like it's fed so many different bases for computer conspiracy theories of like that the CDC, et cetera, and what saying they told us not to wear masks, and they told us to wear masks. We can't trust anything they say. And I think what we have to remember is that the backdrop of this is that we don't have a lot of data. So again, we're trying to take the best science we have, which is evolving, take the best experts, put them in a room and try to figure out what's going on. Hey, nice.
My goon
Nice.
mask.
That's rad.
Bought like 4 of them. Thank you, Plasma. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, make a hole, make a hole.
Make a hole, God
Um,
damn it.
Long story short, I think we have some pretty good introductory evidence to say that cloth masks with more than one layer are likely to result in a good reduction in droplets. What does that mean? At the end of the day, if I put a tissue over my mouth and I sneeze and I have COVID, it's not going to do anything. But if I wear a mask, a cloth mask that has 2 layers with tightly woven cotton, then that's going to greatly reduce the amount of droplets coming from my mouth. Now remember, masks do little to filter viron particles going into you. They're really to prevent the droplets from coming out and you are touching them, putting them in your mouth, etc. So as long as we understand what they're good for and which ones are good, I think that is the better approach to take. And I will say this, again, the risks of wearing a mask are so low or non-existent that any potential benefit from a public health perspective of not transmitting a virus to me seems worth it. And that's why I support those recommendations from the CDC. I think we gotta get away from all of this. They told us to, they told us not to, they told us these were okay. Just stop. Like we didn't have the evidence, we didn't have the structure in place. Now we do, and it just makes sense.
Makes sense to wear them.
Correct.
Okay. Because even in that explanation, my mind started going like, "Oh shit! Did he say yes? Did he say no?" And it's literally every fucking news article that I read. At the end, I'm
Where?
like, "Yeah, yeah," and like it really like I don't know, man. And are there actual and I imagine the answer to this is yes, but are there actual medical conditions where people would not wear them or couldn't wear them, and say like, "I'm sorry, I can't do this with X thing I have."
Yeah, I think that there are probably rare cases in certain lung conditions. Like, for example, if someone has really bad COPD,
Hmm.
they might be harmed by wearing a mask. Now, that's, in my opinion, quite rare. And what I think is far more likely to happen is people are going to say, oh, I have this condition that's completely unrelated. I can't wear this mask because they don't want to, or they feel like it violates their constitutional rights. And that's a separate conversation. But what I think we really need to do is just think the actual amount of people that would apply to is so small.
Hmm.
And what we need is a lot of people doing it. If only certain people do it, it just doesn't make sense.
What is your reaction? I'm super interested in what your reactions are to all of these things when you see videos now that masks. Because I remember, and it seems like 100 years ago, where you would be in New York or anywhere, and you would see people out wearing masks. To me, in this area, it always brings up. It's usually like the Asian population, like tourists or whatever that I would mostly see wearing masks out in for no reason, and I was like, oh, why are they so paranoid or blah blah blah? Because I don't understand that because we don't really have that here. Now that it is so acceptable and everybody's wearing them, and it's actually out of place to see somebody not wearing it. What do you think when you see videos of people like outwardly shaming people going into like a grocery store not wearing them, and the other person be like "fuck you," and then it becomes a whole thing.
Yeah.
Energy wasted. What do you think?
I think I'll answer in two parts. I like, let me rephrase that. A part of me is happy that people are passionate about it, right? But then a part of me is also sad that it's so tribalistic now. Like it's both sides saying, "Oh, you're screaming at a person, kicking an old person out of a place because they don't have a mask on, and you're being rude to them. And likewise, oh, there's people not wearing masks and coughing on people. It's become a symbol of political ideology when it shouldn't have anything to do with that.
Right.
And so those types of videos just fuel that debate, because what ends up happening is people who think that masks are good and are generally more supportive of public health interventions, they say, oh yeah, look at that person not wearing a mask. They got what they deserved. And the other people say, look at these people that are bullying this other person. It just adds fuel to the fire. So, part of me is happy that people are passionate about public health that much, that they're willing to do that. But at the same time, we got to be careful that those types of things don't just lead to, there are certain states where people wear masks and it's cool, and some states where people will look at you weird if you wear a mask. And that's what we don't want, because what ends up happening is that the virus doesn't just stay in one state. Right. So it's not going to respect any of these borders. It doesn't care about your political ideology. It's going to spread mindlessly, because that's what this virus does. We're only hurting ourselves, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And at least now, and I can't decide whether it is fun, fun being really subjective, of like, now that we've all come to the realization we're gonna have to wear these for a long time, getting cool looking ones. Like I said, this is my goon mask that the goons have made with the stompy foot on it. I have another one. It's not up here with me now, I don't think, but it's got skulls and roses on it. Like, if you're gonna go, man, like, go out in style at least. And I have another one I gave to my wife that says, "This too shall pass." Like, I got it off of Etsy like two months ago. So, that's, if we're gonna do it, like, you might as well have a little bit of fun with it. I can't wait to see a whole army of Bane masks. I walked into a store the first time that I had to wear a mask, and I also conceal carry. So I was like, I'm walking into a retail establishment with a mask on, carrying a gun. I didn't think this would happen until I was at least 60, and I had to pay for retirement. And then there's like, people have, or I don't know how true this is, but like conflicting laws. I don't know if they're state level or whatever, about you can't wear a face covering if you're carrying a weapon or conceal a weapon. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? All types of different things. Let me go for a minute. I'm asking you about your reaction to a lot of public things, and I don't know, not pop culture is probably the wrong thing to say, but like current events things. I'm mostly interested because I have a friend who, man, she might have had her baby already. I haven't talked to her for a while. That she's pregnant, and she's 8-9 months pregnant by now, and her husband, or her fiance, is a essential personnel. I forget what he does, but whatever. So when he comes home, they stay separated. Or if he's not like some of the medical personnel that have lived separately and things like that, and she hasn't been able to touch him, and they can't be affectionate or whatever. How have you if you want to talk about it? I mean, this gets kind of like the family level personal stuff.
Sure.
How did you, as somebody that has to be in the shit every day, how did you have to separate, or did you have to separate from your family? How long, and if you did, how long was that for? What was that like for you from the first day you did it, and then if you've since stopped doing it to the last day?
My son was born right before the pandemic, and when stuff started really getting scary, he was about 3-4 weeks old. And I was getting off paternity leave, and we were expecting this big surge here. And I remember talking to my wife about what the best thing to do was. And typically, children under the age of about 30 days, 2 months, are particularly susceptible to infections, right? So if your 3-year-old gets a fever, it's probably no big deal. But if your 3-week-old gets a fever, it's a really big deal, right? Their immune systems aren't well formed. The barrier between their brain and their blood is not well formed, so infections can jump really quickly from the blood into the brain. And so if a kid gets sick like that, they go to the hospital, they get a bunch of tests done, they often get admitted, they often get a bunch of antibiotics and treatments, just because those are really dangerous. So I remember, it's like, my kid's 3 weeks old, I'm getting ready to go hit the COVID frontline, and like my hospital, like many other hospitals, had actually erected a tent outside of the emergency department. It's like a disaster tent, like out of contagion. This was a 14 seat bed tent where we were going to put all these overflow COVID patients. And I remember saying, like, I'm going to be working those tents, and then I have to get off work and go and see my 3-week-old. And it was rough. So my wife and I came together and we said, like, I think it'd be wise for you to at least go to Arizona for a little bit and stay with our other family. So go quarantine with my folks in Arizona while this next 4 weeks or so plays out. You know, my son's immune system gets stronger. I get to work a bunch of shifts and not have to expose them. If I get COVID, then I'll hopefully recover at home before they get there. And that's what we had done. So, you know, that was kind of rough to send my family home away for like about a month. And so I was watching my 3-week-old son become a month old, go through these milestones over like FaceTime,
Yeah.
Essentially. My kids, you know, my other kids didn't know how to deal with it because they just call it the big germ, and they're just blaming the big germ for everything. They're like, I can't hang out with dad, big germ. Like, oh, my favorite TV cartoon got canceled, big germ. Big germ. So it was kind of a little bit rough, I'm not gonna lie. And then, you know, when they came back, it was this realization, like, okay, well, he's older. If he got COVID now, it probably wouldn't be so bad. But, you know, we're like a year off from the vaccine. I want to talk about that in the show. I mean, I got a bunch of stuff else we can talk about, but like, we're a little bit ways off from this vaccine. And I got to go to work, and I'm going to see these COVID patients. I do all the time. And then I come back home, and you don't want to get your family sick, but you have to work, and that's your obligation, is kind of be in the front line there. It's rough. And so a lot of times you either have to do your best practice. So when I come home from work, like I have this ritual for how I don't, all my clothes are separate. I hand sanitize when I get off work. I don't recycle any of my masks. I don't keep them in that area there. I take a shower immediately. I hand sanitize. I do all these things that that probably reduce my chance of spreading COVID to my family, but we don't know. And so we stay vigilant. That was kind of a rough thing. I mean, people have taken it like all sorts of extremes. Like there are people that have been away from their family, frontline workers have been away from their family this entire time.
Yeah.
I think that's really changed. I think a lot of people have realized that it's not sustainable and probably not that advisable unless your family has those high risk medical conditions, right? Like you live with people that are old. You live with people that are immunosuppressed, people who have cancer and things like that. People have had to separate and will have to separate for a long time. And some of those people can't get vaccinated. So we're all kind of waiting for this vaccine. You know, may help, may not help. We should talk about that.
Let's talk about it now. Talk about the vaccine.
Good.
So
yeah, vaccine.
Yeah, and that's a really good. This is a really good time to jump into it because now that we all have this this innate desire that once we get an inch, we want to take a mile. So once a little bit opens up, people start thinking like, oh, we're good now. Like it's just nature, right? It's human nature, and we're like go full speed into it. And they hear like vaccine trials and this and that and the other thing. So let's talk about ground truth of a potential, if there is ever going to be one. Let's talk about the potential vaccine.
Yeah, vaccines. It's a process. People are like, what the hell? Why can't you develop a vaccine in like a couple of weeks? Like it's like some episode of like Spider-Man or something where it's like they're just gonna mix some chemicals together and they have a vaccine. Like it's a big deal because they want to make sure that they can deliver many things, but two main things. One, a vaccine that actually works, and then two, that's safe. The only way we are able to do that is by studying it over time. And there's lots of great math involved in how many people you have to trial this in over how long and what you're looking for to determine whether or not a vaccine meets certain safety standards. The other thing is that, and this is a big thing, I want to just clarify this for people that we don't know 100% that if you get COVID, that you won't get COVID again, right? There are certain diseases where you get it once and you have near lifetime immunity to, right? There are others, like the common cold, you can get infected with rhinovirus or adenovirus, and its immunity only lasts, months. Meaning, like, you don't get the cold once in your life and you're done. We all get colds. After DEF CON every year, I get the con crud 100% of the time. And so we don't know what that looks like. Why don't we know this? It's a brand new virus. No one's ever had it before. So it makes a lot of sense that once you get coronavirus, you're going to have some immunity to it. And we've seen that people have antibodies. How long, do those antibodies prevent you from getting COVID again? We don't know. We think it does. We have lots of other examples of where that happens. And we don't know that how long it lasts for. Because of those types of uncertainties, we got to do a little extra stuff on the vaccine, to make sure that that's the case. And to shrink that down to the timetable, had a lot of people saying, wow, can we really even do this in a year, 18 months? And I think they're so motivated and have so many resources at their hands. I'm hopeful. We've had some recent studies released that kind of are positive about the vaccine's development, meaning that they were able to produce a vaccine. They were giving this vaccine and it produced antibodies. That's the first step. Now we have to see at what level and in what types of people, levels high or low, do the levels correspond to immunity, and perhaps how long that lasts. So long story short, we had heard this magic number, like a year, 18 months. Was it a year, 18 months from January? Was it a year, 18 months from now? What are we talking about potentially having a vaccine? If everything goes right and it works and we can actually produce it at high enough quantities, and this is the really hard part, distribute it among the population and get them vaccinated. So barring supply chain issues and the inevitable really hard problem of vaccinating a lot of people, potentially have a vaccine as early as spring, like maybe late winter, spring. That would be miraculous. And that'd be great. But even if you get the vaccine, we don't know some of these other questions. We don't know how long the vaccine will last, et cetera. Because sometimes you have to get a booster, right? You get a tetanus booster every 10 years, et cetera. So these are still some unknowns. With the vaccine, we're hoping you should have it by then. But it could go longer than that. And maybe even once we have a vaccine, getting it to people is the issue. And then the other thing that really frightens me is because of that tribalism we had talked about, that people aren't going to get vaccinated. That's to me, that'll be the ultimate insult to this pandemic, is that people are going to be so angry and divided and turn this into a political issue, especially in the era of the election, that they're going to say, my political ideology means I shouldn't trust this vaccine. I'm not going to get this vaccine. And we cannot accomplish this really critical thing, which is herd immunity, without a certain percentage of the population getting the vaccine. We cannot turn the tide of this infection unless we get a large amount of vaccinated people. And so I'm kind of a little scared about what's going to happen when we actually do a vaccine, if people are going to show up to their clinics and get vaccinated.
Leads me into my next question, because it's something that I'm actually doing. And I have gotten people are like, oh, that's cool that you're doing it, or that's bullshit, why you're doing it, why you care, blah, blah, blah. Now that tests are, I guess, a little easier to come by. You can actually, so in my area, I called my doctor for some very specific reasons. I'm fine right now. I feel a little sick right now, but back in February, I'd come back from flying to Miami, and I was really sick on and on, and it was just really out of character. And then my gym, somebody had turned out to have, so it was a bunch of little elements that came together where I was like, now I'm kind of curious if I did have it. I think it's a natural human reaction to wonder, kind of like, hey, did that lottery ticket have numbers on it that match something, something like that. Except this is a really shitty lottery to win. So I called, and maybe you can answer this. I mean, we're across the country from each other, but I called my doctor and I was like, hey, what's the deal with getting tested for COVID? I know there's different kinds of tests, I guess, for the antibodies, and I'll let you clear that up as I stumble through medical jargon. And they said, oh, if you don't have any symptoms, we're not doing it. And even if you do it, it's going to cost you $1,000 and not be covered and blah, 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 blah. And I put that out online, and I think it was Nicole Beckwith, as a matter of fact. It might have been, I forget who it was, but they said, hey, you can just go to Quest Diagnostics site, pay $120, schedule your antibodies test, and Bob's your uncle. There you go. So I scheduled one. It's scheduled for on Monday. Because I am curious, and if it happens to be nothing, I've spent $120 on stupider things before. What are your thoughts? If somebody that you were treating had said hey, I'm gonna go spend this money to go and take this antibody test, is it full of shit? Is it worth peace of mind, or just knowing if you're that curious? Am I an asshole for doing it? That's what I want to know.
No, you're not an asshole. You're an asshole before you chose to
do it.
So
other things, yeah.
Just kidding. No, you're not an asshole.
his fucking haircut.
It,
Jesus.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me. I don't think you're probably taking a test from someone else. Back in the early days when we only had exceptionally limited testing, we had to be very judicious about who got it because it would change things, right? Like we would do something about it. Now I think that perhaps that's somewhat changed. And you're talking about the antibody testing. So we'll go over kind of different tests real quick. Get this virus. Everyone's seen the pictures of it. It's that spiky boy with the red
spiky
spike.
boy.
Spiky boy.
The spiky thick boy.
So, yeah, the spiky boy. So the virus attacks you. So you have it get into your body. It replicates. In somewhere between 4 or 5 days and 2 weeks, you get symptoms, right? Like fever, cough. If you're lucky, that's all you get. Or maybe you get no symptoms at all, but you still have the virus replicating in your system and you're still spreading that virus around. If we test you then, when the infection is going and it's rampant and you haven't developed any immunity, we do what's called a Pcr test. And that just looks for the presence of parts of the virus. Mm-hmm. It looks and says, hey, is the virus present, yes or no? Then we check for antibodies. So say you clear the infection. Why did you clear the infection? Your body made antibodies to this virus. And because it made antibodies, it was able to fight those. And now the antibodies are kind of replacing the virus because they're fighting it. And there's two things that it tests for. There's something called IgM. IgM are like early antibodies. Your body's like, oh man, this infection's gnarly. We are just gonna make these IgM antibodies. They're not the best antibodies. They're not as good as the later stage antibodies, but they fight and they do a good job. They turn the tide of battle. And then your body develops IgG antibodies. And so when you go on Monday to get your test, I'm not sure what test you have, but it can test for IgM or it can test for IgG or it can test for both. And so some of your listeners might have heard something called a panel. When it's a panel, it's usually the IgM and IgG. What do these numbers mean? And this goes back to the heart of your question. I don't think you're an asshole. I just want to tell you that I don't know what the answer to that test one way or the other means to you. Mm-hmm. And that's because I'm not you and I don't understand what you value. And also, I don't know what test they're using. The reason that there's more controversy about this is because the FDA that approves these types of tests, they said, listen, we can't in COVID. We just can't go and check every single test and make sure that it works and that it's accurate because we're just overwhelmed right now. And we don't want to stop it because if it can help the pandemic, great. And so that rigorous type of testing that was involved in validating all these tests isn't there. So what does that mean for us? It means that some antibody tests out there are not good, meaning they don't give a reliable test. So you could tell you you're positive for antibodies and really you're not. You can tell you you're negative for antibodies and you're really not. Some of these tests were truly just shit. Now, big diagnostic companies like Quest or reputable hospitals are much, much less likely to have bad tests, right? They know which ones are good. They're not going to buy bad tests. And when bad actors or bad test batches are made aware, they quickly flush those ones out and they say, we're not going to use those ones. So the chance that you have a reliable test or an accurate or sensitive and specific test is probably pretty good. Well, let's say you get tested on Monday and it says, hey, you have IgG antibodies. It means, wow, you probably had the infection maybe in February. When you called me up and you asked me for some antibiotics for STDs, it really wasn't STDs, it was actually COVID.
Point of order, I asked him for the old school long Q-tip to test.
You asked me to do it over telemedicine, and I couldn't. It's like, I can't. I don't have a robotic arm.
I said, I'm just guide my arm. I'm sure I could do it. Matter of fact, I'm going to have El Cantaro build one for me for next time, just for fun.
Let's make sure we're cleaning it really good between uses. So
much for HIPAA, motherfucker.
HIPAA doesn't matter.
Hey, hold on for what? Actually, keep talking. My dog wants to go out of this door.
All right. So long story short, if it's positive and you got IgG antibodies, like what do you do then? Do you say, oh man, I had COVID? That's awesome. I can go out. I don't have to wear a face mask. I can go to the Ozarks pool party. Like, oh man, I'm gonna go to the unofficial DEF CON that's gonna happen in Vegas because I had COVID and this antibody test tells me it's positive and great, I'm off the hook. Like, I can't tell you that.
No.
Any doctor that tells you that doesn't know what they're talking about because of the things we talked about earlier. Just because you have antibodies doesn't mean that that's going to last. It doesn't mean that you can't get COVID again. It probably does, but we don't know. And so in one scenario, when you're positive for antibodies, what do we do with that? I don't know, it's hard to tell. And if it's negative, we still have questions about whether or not the tests are accurate. So maybe it's negative and really you're positive, or maybe you're negative. Let's say you're truly negative. You've never had COVID before. How's that going to change your life? And some people will say, oh, I'm going to isolate more. I'm not going to go to that Ozarks pool party. And if that's the case, and that's how you're going to use that antibody test to guide your decisions to be more conservative in that, I think that's a positive thing.
Which is how it's just about how I would use it, plus bragging rights.
That you haven't had COVID or that you had COVID?
No, that I have it. I was chosen.
You gonna get a tattoo?
Yeah.
Spiky boy?
A spiky thick boy right here.
Nice. Like you killed one COVID?
You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get DEFCON Jack, but I'm gonna get him drawn with Daddy, so he's Spiky Boy.
I love it.
I don't know why they didn't go with that as opposed to the Jack with the mask on. Nicole, of course you're invited. What are you talking about? You're such a rock star. You're just automatically invited to everything. How dare you? Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I'm gonna get I don't know, my wife told me to get fucking something to do.
Hey man,
getting bored.
I'm not talking shit. I say do it. I get it, man. All right.
Of course, I posted on Reddit, and Reddit was like, well, I'm a doctor. Why are you even doing that? And I'm like, fuck off.
Yeah. You know what those are? Those are tightwad dermatologists.
That's fucking dermatologists. I do have a real bone to pick with dermat, but we'll get to that in another episode. You are one of my most prepared guests. I know that you have notes. You probably have notes in front of you, don't you? Yeah. You have stuff you want to talk about. What I'm gonna step back from any questions I have. What other stuff did you want to hit?
I think we got to talk about contact tracing. Apple, Google making contact tracing. We as hackers care about this. I honestly think this is a really important topic. No one's got it figured out. We're particularly a privacy and security focused community. That's what we are. We're hackers. So we're out there championing our privacy primarily. And I think that's tremendously important. What we're talking about now is, this struggle between public health and privacy. And now we have these new technical gizmos and applications and APIs that are talking about, hey, how can we fight COVID and do contact tracing? So for those of you out there that don't know what contact tracing is, it's kind of an old school epidemiological tool. So when we treat and fight diseases, we only have so many different tools in our toolbox, some things like vaccinations and tests. And one of the things we have is contact tracing. What is contact tracing? It's very simple. You think a person has an infection, or they have an infection, you want to ask them, hey, where were you for the last 14 days? I want you to tell me. Here's a 14-day calendar. What'd you do on Monday? I went to Quiznos. I know you're lying. There's no Quiznos in your area. Where'd you really go? I went to the strip club. Okay, we got to talk about that. And Monday of week 1 through Sunday of week 2, we're going to go by hour and have you figure it out. Why? Because you need to tell me everyone you come into contact with. So all those strippers at the strip club, you have to tell me because they could be exposed to COVID, and we have to go and warn them that they should quarantine. So you find an infection, you do contact tracing investigations, and you try to keep everyone that touched that person or got close to that person and isolate them. So you can imagine, we're talking how hard it would be to do contact tracing of one person, right? How much work that would take. They tell you they went to the grocery store. You got to go to the grocery store and pull all the records of people, the video, the footage. And that's a really hard thing to do. The thought is, can we use technology to make this contact tracing easier? And I see where, many of your people listening, many of your stream viewers are familiar with the recent announcement by Google and Apple to kind of get into this contact tracing. What does it do? I'm not going to go into the deep technical details, but imagine this. Your Android phone, your iPhone, they are constantly using Bluetooth low energy, and they're broadcasting certain unique identifiers that change, and there's this whole architecture around it to try to figure out this. Can we then automate who you got in contact with by utilizing Bluetooth on your phone? And so your phone will store who you came in close contact with, their phones will store that, so that when someone turns positive, they can tell the public health agency, hey, I'm positive. And then everyone else can look at their own data and say, hey, I came in contact with that person. I should probably quarantine. Now that's the idea of contact tracing. I'm going to just go ahead and put a giant asterisk on this and say, listen, I'm not saying I support this, and I'm not saying that it's going to actually work. What I'm going to tell you is that there's a lot of people that have concerns about the privacy and security of this data. I mean, we could talk about, the ability to track potentially people, to figure out, to link them and figure out their patterns by actually looking for these types of broadcasts and kind of reverse engineering this. These things are all real, but we have to ask ourselves as a community, like, where are we going to fall on this? And I think that we kind of have to be unified. A hacker is going to come and say, we oppose contact tracing using Bluetooth through the Apple and Google APIs, and say we're not into this and we're going to fight this, or we're going to do active security research to investigate its security. Or are we going to say, listen, like, public health is going to win out on this, and I'm okay to opt into a system as a hacker who cares about security. I'm okay to opt in and accept those types of security and privacy concerns. I think it's important for us to have these types of conversations, because what I don't want is one of two things to happen. For us to miss the boat, if it really truly is an advantageous technology and we can save some lives and we can really scrutinize the architecture and lend our expertise into making it better, great. That's one possibility, is we miss the boat, we don't get any benefit from it, we don't get the help. Or the second thing is it gets rolled out and it's a security and privacy nightmare. And then we're really going to have to fight back strongly from a hacker perspective and a hacker community. That's what I want. So we have to have these conversations now. I see some of our ranks doing that, but I don't see nearly enough. And that's something that we should really, really be paying attention to right now. I know we all have fatigue. We've been at home. We just want to go back to our normal lives. We can't get into a new political argument or potentially a new thing to flame war over on the internet. But this is so, so, so important. So we got to be having that conversation now.
Is that kind of in the same lines as like that crowdsourcing of folding at home thing of crowdsourcing like computing power for research on the virus? And because I hear folding at home talked about all the time, and I never hear about contact tracing like talked about amongst us, at least.
That's a good point. Like, we're willing to do stuff like that. We're willing to, get together and turn our 3D printers into printing face masks for providers, and people are sewing masks. We're willing to turn our technical hacker expertise into really helping fight this virus, but we're not really having the necessary discussions around the privacy and security of electronic contact tracing. That to me is really, really important, because we have something now that we didn't have before, and that's expanded testing capacity. I'm not saying we have nearly enough, and I'm not trying to go on one side of the political spectrum or what on that, but we do have more testing than we had before. And what is that going to do? It's going to find positives. And when you find a positive, what do? You only have so many tools in your toolkit. Quarantine them at home and do contact tracing. We don't have enough. There's not enough public health workers in the world to do adequate contact tracing in America alone, let alone our own infrastructure. So a lot of people are saying, if we can't do contact tracing and we need to do that to stop these hotspots, we need technology. We got to be right at the discussion point of that, to really scrutinize this, to make sure we're okay with it, and then give recommendations or suggestions or advice, or reject the platform as a whole. That's so, so important.
We should do a talk on it. Write a talk on it.
Fingers crossed, man.
Yeah. Yeah, like, how do you think is the best way to get people's attention on it? Like, if that's something super important that we should really be looking at, like, what do you do, like Contact Con?
Like, I'll ask you, would you opt in? And would you upload, let me rephrase that. Would you give away a little bit of your privacy potentially, or a little bit of your security and a little bit of battery life on your phone to potentially find out if you've been exposed or not? So that's the whole thing. So if everyone does it, let's say you have 100 people, they all have their phones, and then 3 or 4 of them get in contact with one another. When someone reports that they got sick, they can push notifications out to the rest of the people who came in contact with them, and you get a little notification on your phone saying, hey, you potentially came into contact with someone with COVID. You should get quarantined, and if you feel sick, you should go see a doctor. Would you sacrifice some of your privacy, potentially some of your security, and potentially some of your battery life to get an alert saying you might have been exposed to COVID?
So
that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So for me, I am a very bad Very bad example of a hacker. I would be like, yeah, fuck it, just do it. That's fine. All my shit's already compromised anyway. What do I care? This can never come back to bite me. That's very much me. I'm not great when it comes to that. However, you have people like in chat with Nicole says yes if it was only going to a secure location and under HIPAA. November says if we have different watchmen, I wouldn't mind opting in. Um, Monkey Dragon says we can call it full contact con. That would be an amazing irony. Um, so yeah, and but then when you really get into the bits and bytes of it of like, okay, what's the secure location and is it under HIPAA? Well, who's watching the watchers and blah blah blah. And you get like we always do with every single fucking yeah, would it be open source? With every single thing that we do, we get mired down in these details and like it isn't good enough. It's good enough. It's not good enough. I don't like who's running it or blah blah blah. Like, and then we never get anywhere. Me personally, I would do it. But caveated with I'm not saying everybody should just jump in and do it. You should absolutely ask those questions. I would before I sign on the dotted line. I'd probably be like, well, let me run this by my 8 million friends who know better than this. I mean, I'm also of the opinion of like it's really hard to paint this. You can't paint any of this in black and white. You got to give a little to get maybe a lot, and it takes some unconventional things. It takes eroding of some things to get. It's a very hard like once you actually sit down and have an adult conversation about it. Like where does it stop? Where does it slide? Everybody's worried about sliding scales of things. I've had conversations with friends of mine who think the whole shelter in place thing and not being able to go out are rights that we're only going to get back with blood now. Like that was a legit quote that I got from somebody, which the more I thought about it, I'm like, all right, like that's how it starts by a little inch at a time. And then once you allow yourself to, and I stepped into, I put on my empathy hat, right? And I stepped into their feelings on this of like, okay, well, what if this does erode some things and they can just say, you can't fucking go here now because we said so and ooga booga. And what if that does turn into that? And then you have to fight to get those rights back. And what if you can't? That was literally 5 minutes ago that we talked to you asked me, what would you do? And I'm already down the fucking rabbit hole. And this is just me, who is not the world's greatest hacker by a long stretch of the imagination, not the greatest thinker, not the greatest mind. And you'll have those people fighting this out. So, I don't know. Short answer is, yeah, I'd do it. Long answer is, probably. And then Joe says, yes, here's the software. It does this. Here's the source. You can see exactly how it works. Yeah, man, it's hard.
Yeah, it's totally rough. And I want to say there are a few things that, let me rephrase it. Hackers are super diverse, right? They come from all backgrounds, all walks of life, all political ideologies. But there are some things I think that unify us, or unify most of us. We care about things like privacy. We care about things like encryption in our online rights and things like that. So if we can come together on some of these topics, like something like this, we can be a powerful voice of reason one way or the other. And there are rare opportunities for us to do that in the hacker community. And that's what we'd like to move towards. And maybe it's the wrong question to ask, like, what would you do personally? Maybe it's like, well, let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about the pros and cons. And then let's get into the real technical nitty gritty, because that's where the details are. And I appreciate whatever listener posted to the specifications. And I'd also like to point to, just in fairness, I mean, go read some articles talking about how amazing the architecture is and how it's really privacy focused. And there's recent news about how Apple and Google are really getting a lot of heat from the public health community because they're not sharing GPS locations and other types of important, potentially useful information. And they're saying, no, we're not going to do this. And then also go to the EFF's website. EFF has a really good write-up on a lot of the technical shortcomings and potential security implications of it. And they have a pretty well-written, thorough article talking about some different attack vectors and privacy concerns. So, run the gamut, get informed, come to the table, and let's have an important conversation about this.
I think I smell a 5-hour-long panel talk for us coming up soon. No, I mean, that's great. Like, this is not something that I've really I see it in my periphery of all the news and the Twitter, and they're like, oh, I see a contact. Oh, okay, now that's over there. And I see another thing. Oh, look at this thing over here. So I have seen that in my periphery. I haven't given a lot of thought to it, nor do I think maybe a lot of people have. Or they hear it automatically and say, fuck that. You're not tracing me at all. Or like, oh, that's a great. So yeah, no, absolutely. So other than contact tracing, on your little magical sticky note, what other ones did you want to hit? Seriously, best
Man,
prepared
I could
guess.
be here all night, but long story short, hydroxychloroquine does not
I was
likely
gonna
work.
ask you about that.
Okay, so just for the record,
The
don't.
fuck?
I mean, like I tweeted. Listen, like I am probably pretty left leaning from most things, and I truly can go on my Twitter feed and you can see that I don't necessarily agree with the president on nearly anything. There are some things that transcend politics, and there's a few of them. One, don't put glow in the dark Lysol in your veins. Like, don't put Clorox. Don't swallow Clorox. Don't do that. That will hurt you. Two, there are several more increasingly damning studies saying that hydroxychloroquine does not work, and so don't take it unless a doctor tells you to do it. And then if a doctor tells you to do it, make sure they're a real doctor. And then lastly, there's some promise about remdesivir. It's still really early to say. There was a recent trial published in the New England Journal saying that 5 days is better than 10 days. And so there's still a jury out on the remdesivir that has had mixed results. So long story short, what medicines do we have available to help fight COVID? Maybe remdesivir, but the long story is that we're still early and we don't really have much to fight.
And without, I mean, I definitely people know where I lean on this, but I try to like temper that, especially for this show, because you hit the nail on the head. There are left leaning hackers. There are right leaning hackers that aren't assholes. There are centrists, and we are all across the board, and it's a beautiful thing. Without us just getting into the whole partisan bashing or whatever, what do you suppose is the impetus? What is the motivation to be a leader of a country? Again, I'm not casting aspersions one way or the other right now. What could possibly be the reason, and I think about this a lot, to do that, to go and use your bullhorn and your seat of power and say, go fucking swallow this. This will be great. What, like, do you, and I'm not even asking as like a medical professional or whatever, just as two guys talking. What the fuck?
No, that's exactly like the fuck. Here, I think, I don't know. I'm not going to try to jump in the head. I will say this. Like, there were a lot of people besides Donald Trump that were supporting this. There were doctors. There still are doctors that say,
Really?
oh, the trials they didn't give hydroxychloroquine early enough. They didn't use the right dosage. I mean, they're shrinking. There's less of the scientific community that's in support of that. And it already probably was a minority. I think people wanted hope. Honestly,
Sure.
I'll take the president aside. Like, I think people want hope, and there's nothing wrong with that. They want there to be some miracle drug that is dirt cheap and we can produce in mass quantities and we can mail to everyone's house and they can take it and then coronavirus doesn't matter anymore. Like, that's not a partisan thing. That's not a bad thing to want, but your response to the evidence. So, a couple things. One, if you are basing your decisions on really flimsy evidence, which was at the beginning, hydroxychloroquine's proposed scientific evidence base was almost non-existent. It was very, very low, crappy evidence, but it went off like wildfire as soon as the president tweeted about it. And a lot of people were saying, we got to study this to study this. So if you're willing to recommend a treatment to Americans without a good scientific basis, that's a big red flag. And the other red flag is that when you repeatedly get data that contradicts your belief, if you're not willing to re-examine your assumptions and change your mind, that's another big red flag that you need to take a step back and really reevaluate what you're doing, because it's really bad tribalism, and you want to be right, you don't want to be wrong. But if you can't change your mind and tell people the best information at the time that you have it, then you're a hack. You shouldn't be doing what you're doing, and you shouldn't be in the position to give people advice. There are documented cases of people dying from taking hydroxychloroquine, not just the one in Phoenix, but people taking it And in the studies that were released, it caused potential deadly dysrhythmias, and people were dying of potentially bad cardiac side effects of the drug. That's enough to say, listen, if you were a supporter of it before, you can't be now. And then if you're still a supporter of it, you should be trying it yourself in suppository form only.
Okay, hold on. Just making that note. However, can you confirm that copious amounts of cocaine kill the virus, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
I think
Okay.
all bleeding stops eventually,
Okay.
and all disease can be treated with, increasing amounts of cocaine.
All right. Just hold on. I gotta check. No, I got plenty. I'm good. It's fine. It's a clever, and I've heard it before, but it's jarring to hear an ER doc say all bleeding stops eventually. I need a mask that says that. I should have got my mask printed with all bleeding stops eventually, and a link to buy whatever the fuck it's called. Well, dude, I could keep you on here forever, man. But I need you rested. I need you of sound mind and sound body. Well, it's only 11, 10, I think 8 o'clock. But you got a little one to get back to. I heard him. Isn't it past his bedtime? What's he doing up? How dare he?
Watching your stream.
You're a bad father. Yeah, dude, I think that's a really great conversation that I would love to keep going about the contact tracing, and I think we got to work on that. I forget if I asked you before. Do you write? Do you blog? Do you where can people, if they're like, God, this dude really seems like he knows his shit, where can I follow him?
Oh man, good. Yeah, just follow me on Twitter.
Okay.
I think I need to, when COVID settles down, I need to start blogging. But every year at DEF CON, for the last, I think it's been 5 years, I host a panel called Do No Harm, where we get a bunch of doctors and FDA government people, hackers into a room. So it's usually like horribly scheduled right at the same time as Hacker Jeopardy. So, whatever, if you have to choose between the two, go ahead and just whatever you want. But if you want to come to that content, I'm pretty active in the biohacking village. And then if you're out by San Diego way, go check out the DC858 meetups where you'll see me from occasion. And that's a pretty rad group.
Are you going to be involved in DEF CON Safe Mode?
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know in what capacity, maybe I'll just show up and lurk the halls, but in any case, I'll be around and, hopefully maybe I'll have some content.
Yeah. As will I. In one, I'm probably end up in Vegas anyway. We're just going to go to the pool. Why the hell not? So Kwadi, thank you, dude, so much for coming on. And I know you're always fucking tired and busy, so I appreciate any time that you ever give me. Thank you to everybody in chat. Thank you to anybody who's going to be listening to this on Apple iTunes podcast, which I just started doing. I got to rip the audio from this and it goes up there. So if you're listening on Apple's iTunes, thank you for putting me on in your car or whatever. Yeah, you can, all my information's up here. It's at 2OC Stream on Twitter, Instagram at Dekaki. Yeah, come and find us. Come and hang out. I do this every Tuesday and every Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern, live on Twitch, streams to YouTube as well now. I'm just doing all of it. So thank you. Thank you for all the subs. Thank you to Bash and November, who's always in here, and Alyssa and Nicole, and I can go on and on and on. And now I sound like one of those streamers. Dang, smash the button, man. Smash the button. So until next week, we're going to do something else. But yeah, dude, thank you so much. And I'm going to close everything out.
Thanks, man.
If I